And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder, saying, "Come and see."
Noise of Thunder Radio with Christian J. Pinto.
Okay, praise the Lord, you guys, and welcome. I'm Chris Pinto. This is Noise of Thunder Radio. Today on the show, we are going to talk about the rise of Islam in Texas. Islam in Texas. In fact, we're going to be talking about Jesuits, Georgetown University, Texas, and the Black Pope, former Black Pope during the time of Hitler, Vladimir Ledochowski. We talk about in our film, American Jesuits. Many of you have seen that film. In fact, I just got back from Orlando, Florida, where they had the Prophecy Watchers conference down there. I was one of the speakers. I got to speak 2 nights on a Friday and a Saturday night on American Jesuits. There was a very, very strong response from the audience. A lot of people were very intrigued, fascinated, very interested in the information, to say the least. Had a lot of great conversations down there. After I gave, I think it was my second presentation, there was a number of people that came up afterwards, but one of them was a guy who was a veteran who was stationed over in, I can't remember if it was Iraq or Afghanistan, but one of those countries during the 9/11 wars. And he was stationed over there, and he was part of a team of guys that had to go and speak with some of the Muslim leaders. And he went in there to speak to one of them, and the guy looked at him and he said, "Are you a Christian?" And the guy, the military guy now, the guy that's telling me this story, he said, "Yes, I'm a Christian." He says, "Well, then I'm not going to speak to you unless you are a Roman Catholic. Only if you're a Roman Catholic will I speak to you." Okay? And then everything went on from there. But he said he didn't understand what that meant at the time. But after he saw my presentation on the Jesuits and their role and their involvement with Islam, because they've been very, very involved with Islam throughout the 20th century and really even before. But he said then it began to make a lot more sense. There is a political alliance between Rome and the Islamic powers. And of course, this fits in with at least some of the reformers' interpretation of the book of Revelation. Not all of them. There was certainly a variety of opinions, but I have often made reference to the research of Dr. Francis Nigel Lee, and he has his work on Islam in the Bible. And let me read part of what he says. He says, and why is this important, brothers and sisters? Because Islam is invading the state of Texas. They are planning this super mega mosque community there in Texas. And yes, they are planning to implement Sharia law, Islamic Sharia. Unless you follow this story, you're going to be amazed that Islam is now experiencing what looks like a great leap forward here in the United States. But let me read this first. This is from Dr. Lee, who says, but what, if anything, does the Holy Bible say about Islam? And he goes on to say, quote, "The scripture of the Older Testament warns us against false prophets and predicts the need to follow especially Christ as the predicted great prophet of the Newer Testament. Deuteronomy 13, 1 through 5, and 18, 15 through 18. Indeed, in a sermon on Deuteronomy 18:15, Calvin, meaning John Calvin, held that Muhammad was one of the 2 horns of Antichrist. And that appears to be the reference to Revelation 13 and verse 11, which describes a great beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. Dr. Lee goes on. He says, many see also the two legs of the image in Nebuchadnezzar's dream as teaching the same thing. Now, the whole idea of the two legs of the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream typically represent the Eastern and Western Roman Empire. So what Dr. Lee is saying is that Calvin seems to have had the view that Muhammad is one of the two horns of Antichrist, the two horns representing Eastern and Western Roman Empire, Rome in the West, Islam in the East. Okay, so one of the two horns. So he goes on, he says, quote, also many Bible-affirming Christian commentators, such as Selnecker, Nigrinus, Critias, Bullinger, Fox, Napier, Piraeus, John Cotton, Thomas Parker, Increase Mather, Cotton Mather, Jonathan Edwards, and George Stanley Faber, etc., believed that both Islam and papacy were predicted and condemned as the fulfillment of the then future tyranny predicted either in Daniel or the book of Revelation or both. Okay? So when we hear people say that they believe Islam is Antichrist, that's correct. When other people say that the papacy is Antichrist, we believe that is also correct. They're both Antichrist. They both claim the authority of Jesus Christ. Okay? They both claim the authority of Jesus, but of course they pervert the character and the authority of Jesus. So when they teach their doctrines about who Jesus is, they speak as a dragon. They bring in damnable heresies, even as the Apostle Peter warned. False teachers would arise who would bring in damnable heresies. The Muslims deny that Jesus is the Son of God, and the papists have a whole system of corruption and legalism and so on, and apostasy that now embraces paganism fully with so-called Christianity. So, I generally agree that Islam and the papacy represent these two horns of the beast there in the book of Revelation. I think that's why we're seeing this union and this working together of the Vatican and the powers of Islam. Okay, so now Islam in Texas. Islam in Texas. This is a problem that has been brewing for decades. If you were to go back and watch the movie by Steve Emerson, the documentary by Steve Emerson called Jihad in America that was done back in the 1990s before 9/11 happened, he warns about the activities of the Muslims in the state of Texas. Okay? Some of you will also remember what was called Muslim Capital Day, what is still called Muslim Capital Day. Okay? Or as it's called, Texas Muslim Capital Day. Now ask yourself the question, why would there be Texas Muslim Capital Day? Why especially Muslim Capital Day? Well, you had the controversial speaker, very zealous Christian woman, Christine Wyke, who's known for her very bold behavior, but she said this when she interrupted. There were all these Muslims at the Capitol there in the state of Texas, and she broke in on them, grabbed the microphone, and here's what happened. Listen.
Celebrates the 7th Texas Muslim Capital Day. We are honored. Thank you.
I proclaim the name of the Lord Jesus Christ over the capital of Texas. I stand against Islam and the false prophet Muhammad. Islam will never dominate the United States, and by the grace of God, it will
Okay, so then they drag or they pull her away. Christine Weick, I think she personally, I'm actually a fan of that moment. I think that's great. I think we as Christians, we need more boldness, not less boldness. I think being quiet and just going along with things as they're happening. You see, Islam is not like other belief systems. They're not like the Amish. They're not just going to live here quietly. Notice they have to go to the capital and proclaim Islam there at the state capitol. They are going to keep pushing until they find a way to put the whole country under Islamic Sharia. That is what they do. That is their religion. That is the purpose of their religion, even though they spend a lot of time gaslighting people with their doctrine of taqiyya and pretending that that's not really what they're doing, when in fact that is what they're doing. Okay, I'm scrolling through some clips here, but here's another one. This is a CBN News report from 10 years ago. 10 years ago. And this is about an Islamic Sharia tribunal begins operating in Texas 10 years ago. People need to understand the situation in Texas has been going on for decades, but it's operating. That's why I mentioned Steve Emerson. This goes back probably to the 80s and 90s. Emerson's documentary is happening in the 1990s before even 9/11. But people have to realize that the Muslims have been coming over here and they've been setting up their camps. They've been setting up operations. They've been laying all the groundwork for everything that's happening now. But they most definitely have an agenda to take over our country. At points, they've openly admitted to this. Okay? But let's listen to part of this CBN News report. An Islamic Sharia tribunal begins operating in Texas. And according to, this is on the CBN News YouTube channel, it's dated February 4th, 2015. February 4th, 2015. So this would have been happening during the Obama administration. Okay, here it is. Listen.
A group of Muslims in northern Texas has created what may be the first official Sharia law system in the U.S. The Sharia Tribunal in Irving, Texas, is trying to assure Americans they're not planning to follow the type of Sharia law practiced in Muslim countries. In those places, severe punishments are handed out for even small crimes, women have very few rights, and blasphemy against Muhammad can result in a death sentence.
In their mind, a misconception about what they see through the media, that Sharia means cut the heads and chop the heads and cut the hands and whatever. This is, we are not in that. We are not here to invade White House, to invade Austin.
The imam at the mosque and 3 other Muslim judges are planning to bypass the traditional courts of Texas to handle cases on their own. They'll deal with things like divorce and business disputes. Opponents of Sharia law caution that allowing Sharia courts to operate in the U.S. allows Islamic law to replace U.S. law. It may lead to the creation of Islamic enclaves within the U.S. and will undermine the established U.S. rights of some of the victims.
And of course, there's no doubt that that's exactly what will happen if this is allowed to continue. But notice it's been going on in Texas for many years, So what's happening now with this new big epic Islamic center that they're planning, this is just the next phase. Also, there was a big Islamic presentation in Sugar Land, Texas, where Dr. Andy Woods, his Sugar Land Bible Church is there in Texas. I saw that headline. I thought, wait a minute, where's Dr. Woods? He's got to shout these guys down. And of course, he's been speaking out against it and warning people as well. But yes, the Muslims have been operating, as Steve Emerson warned decades ago, often in the heartland of America, often in these small towns that are more vulnerable because there's a smaller population there. It's not in a major city. And that has been for decades now. It's almost like an incubation area where they can get in there in a small town, just keep quiet initially and get their people in and begin to grow and develop their organization until they get to a point where they're going to do some big thing or other, whatever it is. But there's no question that they have as their ambition the subduing of the United States of America. Now, for anybody who might question that, or they think, oh, that sounds like a conspiracy theory, or that sounds like Islamophobia or whatever, and of course you have people out there who think that way. Most of them are not part of our audience here at Noise of Thunder Radio, but nevertheless, we're going to play when we come back from the break. We're going to go to our commercial break now. When we come back, I am going to play an audio clip from Sharifa Al-Khatib, a female Islamic activist, and part of a speech that she gave on C-SPAN. C-SPAN now, not in some underground bunker somewhere, but on C-SPAN back in 1989. And we're going to let you hear what she said when we come back right after this.
Adullam Films presents a stunning new documentary, The True Christian History of America, exploring the Bible-based Christian origins of the early American view of freedom, tracing the principles of liberty back to England and the Great Reformation. For many years, our schools have taught that the founding of our republic was from the Deists or the Enlightenment in France. But is that truly the case? Did the Enlightenment first declare no taxation without representation or trial by jury? Were they the champions of freedom of speech or of the press or the right to bear arms? And why did Samuel Adams declare that the reign of political Protestantism would commence just before signing the Declaration of Independence? Filmed on location in both the United States and Europe, The True Christian History of America is now available at adullamfilms.com. That's adullamfilms.com. Now available at noiseofthunderradio.com. That's noiseofthunderradio.com.
Adullam Films presents an exciting new documentary, Bridge to Babylon, Part 3 in an award-winning series on the untold history of the Bible. Dr. Jack Moorman calls it a masterful presentation of what is the single most important issue facing Christians today, the defense of the Bible as the Word of God. Why was the Bible changed in 1881? Why have so many churches abandoned biblical inerrancy? And what direction are scholars taking the Scriptures today? Learn the truth in Bridge to Babylon, the sequel to A Lamp in the Dark and Tares Among the Wheat. Bridge to Babylon is now available at noiseofthunderradio.com. That's noiseofthunderradio.com.
Noise of Thunder Radio.
Okay, praise Lord, you guys. I'm Chris Pinto. This is Noise of Thunder Radio. Thanks for staying with the show today. In a minute, we're going to listen to some audio that I think is very powerful, very important to consider. Before we do, however, I want to remind our audience of our two websites. One, you may be listening to this on SoundCloud. You might be listening to it on the Apple iTunes podcast or one of the other outlets out there. Remember, we do have our own website at noiseofthunderradio.com. That's noiseofthunderradio.com. Also, our main ministry website is adullamfilms.com. That's ADULLAM, films, FILMS, after the cave of Adullam in the Old Testament, where David fled to when he was being persecuted, and there all the outcasts of Israel gathered around him. He became their leader. And of course, we believe that's a beautiful picture of our Lord Jesus Christ, who gathers the outcasts. And then they went to fight against the enemies of Israel. And so we fight the good fight of faith through our work in film and video production, also through our Noise of Thunder Radio podcast. So By all means, check out those websites. We also appreciate your prayers. And so let's get into it now with this audio clip. It's really a video clip. You can find it online, of Sharifa Al-Khatib. Here is what she said on C-SPAN back in 1989. She's literally describing the Islamic infiltration of our education system for the purpose of converting all America to Islam. But I'm going to let you hear her say it. Here it is.
Education is one of the most important areas that Muslims have to address. And while our objective, our final objective, is not just to become part of the system that we experience now and that we see, our objective, our final objective, is to create our own Islamic systems, and not only create Islamic systems for Muslims, but to look at all the other people who are sharing this country with us as potential Muslims. And if we look at them as potential Muslims and feel that we have the obligation, which Allah has told us, to try to bring them into the same style of thinking, into the same way of behaving, into the same objectives that we have, then we have to have some way that we can communicate with them and some way we can work with them. And in that long-range process of making America Muslim, all of America Muslim, then we have to have some actual short-range goals. We have to have some way of dealing with them and know how we're going to deal with them and in which ways, and be very calculated about it, or else we will not accomplish our goals.
Okay, so they need to be very calculated about it or they will not accomplish their goals. Now, this back in 1989, she said this, folks, and said it on C-SPAN. Now, why could she say that on C-SPAN back then? I remember the 1980s. Nobody would have thought anything about it because back then there had been no terror attack on the U.S. There had been no 9/11. There had been nothing like that. And also you didn't have independent media. You didn't have the internet. So the ability of independent news sources to document the truth about what goes on with Islam all over the world, and then to have websites, have podcasts and things like this warning people about it, that didn't exist back in the 1980s. So Americans had a very, very limited amount of knowledge or experience where Islam is concerned. People just thought, well, it's just another world religion like the Buddhists or the Hindus or whatever. It's just one of the many pagan religions out there. But hey, this is America. People have and should have the freedom to believe as they wish. That's what people would have thought back then. Nobody would have thought seriously that the Muslims are going to be able to take over the country or that any serious effort could be made by them here in the United States. That's just how people thought. The big concern was communism, the Soviet Union, and all of that, and the Cold War. It's also worth mentioning that this video of Sharifa Al-Khatib is dated 8/7/89. So that's August 7th, 1989. The Berlin Wall fell November 9th, 1989, so later that year. So the Berlin Wall had not yet come down yet. So most Americans at that point weren't even thinking about Islam. They were thinking about the Soviet Union, Red Dawn, all of that. That was what preoccupied the minds of most Americans. It would not be until 9/11 that happens, 11, 12 years later, that anybody begins to seriously think that Islam could be or would be a threat to the United States of America. All right, now something else I wanted to point out about, we talked about Texas Muslim Capital Day. They actually have a whole website on this for Texas Muslim Capital Day. And they're looking forward to it. It's coming up. They've got April 29th. 2025 is apparently going to be Texas Muslim Capital Day this year. Now, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, down to the bottom of the page, And it says let's just read this real quick. It says, quote, Texas Muslim Capital Day is an opportunity for Texas Muslims from across the state to visit the capital, to have their voices heard, meet elected officials, and make positive change. Okay, so then it goes on from there. Now, the executive director of this is a guy named Mustafa Carroll. And he is with CARE. In fact, all of the leaders, the operations manager, the director, and the two directors, they're all part of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. And here is what Mustafa Carroll, the executive director, says on the website. This is a quote on the website. It says, quote, Muslim Capital Day isn't something that is nice to do, but is something we have to do. Our democracy only works when everyone participates. If we don't speak for ourselves and our community, then others will do it for us. I hope all Muslims in Texas will participate in this year's Capital Day. Now, think about that. The very first thing he says is Muslim Capital Day isn't something that is nice to do. That is quite an introduction to what they are doing and their presence there in the state of Texas, which there's no question. They take a very, very aggressive, they do a lot of smiley kind of stuff, but there's no question that they are very, very aggressive. And Yasser Qadi, who is the guy who was confronted years ago because of the quote where he says that Christians and non-Muslims are very, very filthy, dirty creatures, and that while the Muslim is waging jihad, that the life and the property of the infidel is of no consequence, etc. And there was all this controversy over that. Well, Yasser Qadi, is right in the middle of this whole thing. He's one of the Islamic leaders pushing this epic mosque there in the state of Texas. But it's very important to understand the Muslims have been developing networks throughout the state of Texas and in other parts of the country, like New Jersey, like Michigan, etc., for decades, for probably over 50 years now. Okay, and just to be clear for anybody who is not familiar with what's going on in Texas, the word epic, when I say epic, that literally EPIC stands for East Plano Islamic Center, because it's happening in Plano, Texas. Okay? East Plano Islamic Center is called the EPIC Project. And just giving you an overview, this is the AI overview. If you type that in, it says the EPIC Project is a proposed master-planned Islamic community near Dallas, Texas, currently facing opposition and legal challenges. Epic City, the main part of the project, is a residential development encompassing over 1,000 homes, a mosque, a K through 12 school, a community college, and commercial spaces. The project also includes 2 smaller residential projects, Epic Ranches 1 and 2, with smaller, more spacious lots. Now, this is the impression that's being given right now is this is going to be like a no-go zone. Exactly what it turns out to be, we have to wait and see. And when I say no-go zone, it probably is going to be for Muslims only. In other words, if you're a non-Muslim, you're probably not going to be allowed in there. Remember, non-Muslims are not permitted in Mecca or Medina over in Saudi Arabia. Those are Islamic cities. Non-Muslims are not permitted to even visit. You can't go there as a tourist or anything. And so this should be very interesting. Is this epic city that they're planning going to be a no-go zone that it's going to operate under Sharia law? Now, the danger of that with Islam is because of the secretive nature of the Muslims, the fact that they speak Arabic, the average citizen is not going to be able to understand what they're saying unless you learn Arabic. And they know this. It's part of the reason why they maintain Arabic from one generation to the next. And in every part of the world that they go into, Arabic is part of being an authentic Muslim. If you don't speak Arabic, it's debatable whether you're really a true Muslim. But what that does is that allows them to speak to each other in Arabic, and they know that most of the foreigners around them don't speak that language. Okay? It also helps them to maintain secrecy. So if they wanted to do things here in America, like what they're doing in Western Europe, keep slaves, if you will, in their homes or in secret locations, they could start keeping slaves. They could start carrying out crimes. They could run their rape gangs inside this city and molest and abuse non-Muslim girls and women and this kind of thing. And of course, if they have an Islamic police force there and they have Islamic authorities and outside people are not allowed in, who's going to be able to question them or hold them accountable? Okay, if they've got a Sharia court, according to Islamic Sharia, them taking infidel women and children as slaves is acceptable under Sharia law. So this is why this is a danger to the surrounding neighborhoods, the surrounding communities, etc., who are non-Muslim. This is why do they want some secret, separate enclave for themselves like this? This is it's a legitimate concern that all Americans should be concerned about, because if this is permitted in Texas, in theory, it could happen really in any state, anywhere. Okay? It could happen in any state, anywhere. Now, what is the Georgetown University connection here? Well, before we get to that, I'm going to talk about the connection with Georgetown and what the Jesuits are pushing now. The Jesuits are actually pushing the idea that the real mission or purpose, supposedly, of Ignatius Loyola, if you can believe it, that his real purpose was that he was the apostle to the Muslims. Isn't that incredible? But I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. I really couldn't believe it. I'm reading this article, and what they're doing, I think, is rewriting their history to accommodate this agenda with Islam that they have. But anyway, before we get to that, we need to talk about, oh, here we go. This is an article published by the Rare Foundation on this whole epic city there in Texas, this Sharia enclave, as they call it. And the headline of this is, quote, "Bombshell in Texas, retired police lieutenant warns epic city is a phase 2 of a Sharia enclave that's operated in Plano for 12 years while the officials stayed silent." Okay? So, and you're gonna hear this guy. We're gonna play his audio here in a minute. He basically says, people are warning that this epic city is coming and so on. He says, you know what? It's already here. It's been operational for years, and he explains it. So it's important to understand the full context of what he's saying. So this is audio from retired Lieutenant Douglas Deaton, who exposed a disturbing reality. Epic Sharia-controlled enclave in Plano isn't some future vision. It already exists. It goes on. It says, quote, "Most alarming, the enclave includes a fortress-like residence constructed directly beside the Plano Police Academy, strategically positioned to overlook restricted law enforcement areas and tactical assets. They haven't been hiding. They've been operating in plain sight, and no one has stopped them." Bear this in mind, brothers and sisters. I talked about this when the Black Lives Matter riots were happening, and they were burning down one city after another. And I said, folks, whatever we think about the the Trump administration. This is the first Trump administration. Whatever we think about it, the reality is very clear. These radical left-wing criminals are committing crimes that really should put them and their leaders in jail for the rest of their lives, but it didn't matter. Nobody stopped them. Nobody stopped them. Not Democrats, not Republicans. They were allowed to get away with it. And the only people who were prosecuted were those who tried to defend themselves. Those are the only people who got prosecuted. The criminals were not prosecuted, by and large. Okay? And so now here we are with the state of Texas, and you've got what people are calling, I don't understand all their zoning laws and all this other kind of stuff, but according to statements I've heard the governor of Texas make and others make, the way that the Islamists have gone about this is supposedly illegal. They're not following the laws. But who's holding them accountable? Based on what this lieutenant says, no one is holding them accountable. But I want you to hear it from him, not from me. So listen, here it is.
My name is Douglas Deaton, and I'm a resident of Collin County. I retired from the Plano Police Department after 26 years of full-time law enforcement service. And I dealt with representatives of EPIC many times when I was the sergeant for the Plano Police Department. The training sergeant for the Plano PD. There seems to be a general misunderstanding that we're talking about a plan to build an Islamic Sharia-friendly community. The EPIC neighborhood already exists in Plano. It's been there for nearly 12 years. With 74 residential properties, a massive mosque, schools, a medical clinic, and multiple businesses. It also has an office of an Islamic financing institution called the UIF Corporation. The UIF Corporation is not a bank. It's a Michigan-based corporation whose publicly stated purpose is to, quote, engage in financial transactions that are Sharia compliant, end quote. Those are their words, not mine. Local government officials south of here have known for years that only Muslims can purchase homes inside that neighborhood. You have to be a member of their mosque to live there.
Okay, so that confirms what we mentioned here just a short time ago about Mecca and Medina, those being Muslim cities, non-Muslims, Christians, Jews, non-Muslims not allowed in Islamic cities. It sounds like they've already set this thing up to be a no-go zone. It's very important to remember during the whole civil rights movement, a key issue of desegregation was saying that blacks must be integrated into white communities, that white communities did not have the right to say that black people can't go in those communities, can't be a part of them, can't buy homes, rent apartments, etc. So what the Muslims are now doing is completely contrary to the principles of desegregation. It's what the whole civil rights movement was all about. But here now, this retired police lieutenant, he goes on to talk about security issues and how they are specifically overlooking the Plano Police Academy. And so the lieutenant goes on, he describes this whole situation. Here it is, listen.
The first house built in that neighborhood was built right next to the Plano Police Academy. It's a huge structure with two separate front doors. The rear of the property is just a few feet from a large outdoor warning siren. The house has a large second-story platform overlooking the restricted access parking lot where the police department stored specialized vehicles such as bomb trucks, bomb disposal equipment, and the SWAT team's armored vehicle. I am a court-recognized expert in SWAT team tactics and procedures. That house has all the hallmarks of a fortress and a command post. The rear of the house looks a lot like an observation post and a shooting platform. Why would somebody choose to build a house so close to a giant warning siren and a police training site? Why would someone build a huge platform overlooking all those specialized police emergency vehicles? The first owner of that house is a leader in the EPIC neighborhood, and he is also the co-founder of the Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research. And I urge everyone to visit their website and read what it has to say about instituting Sharia law. This is not a matter of radicals hiding in plain sight. They're not hiding. They've been open about their beliefs and their intent. Local government decision makers have failed to ask hard questions for fear of negative publicity and being labeled as bigots.
All right, so again, that was retired Lieutenant Douglas Deaton, Deaton, and he was with the Plano Police Department. So right there where this epic city is happening. Now, it has been, I mean, if you go read most of the stories, they tell you, well, this is something that is in the planning. And then other people come in and they say, well, they haven't done it yet. And some websites say, well, the state of Texas is shutting it down. They're not going to let this happen and whatever. Well, this lieutenant shows up and he says, people are talking about something that is possibly going to happen. He says, no, this has already been happening. It's been going on for years. It's already begun. Now, they've not fully completed it, but it is a work in progress. It's not just a future idea. I think that's very, very important. And of course, the fact that we're getting all these mixed reports out of Texas from mainstream media and independent media, that in itself, I think, is very, very concerning. Why are we getting all these inconsistent reports about what's going on? Now, his question, and again, it was a pointed question, I think, from him, because as he acknowledged, he is a court-recognized SWAT team specialist. He knows about tactics and strategy and things like that. And his very clear implication is that this house that was built right next to the police academy is built as a tactical home, built for strategic purposes. Why would it be built right there next to the police academy? And my suspicion would be one of two things. One, to monitor what the police are doing so they can keep an eye on the police, to make sure if the police, let's say, are going to come somehow or other into their little community, they'll be forewarned about it. That would be one possibility. Another possibility is that they are planning to infiltrate the police department and one day have an Islamic-dominated police force there in Plano, Texas, which is where they're headed in New York City, where they've already got over 1,000 police officers as part of NYPD, Muslim police officers who are part of New York Police Department. And I talked about that on an earlier program. Okay. In fact, let me just double check it here. Muslim police officers in New York City. Okay. So this is according to a magazine or a publication called the Arab Weekly. And it says this, quote, and this was in 2017, an article said, quote, the NYPD officially puts the number of Muslim officers at about 1,000, but Nasser estimates that it is closer to 1,500. Closer to 1,500. Remember, this is back in 2017, so that's 8 years ago. So, okay, so the guy they're interviewing, a guy named Nasser, Detective Ahmed Nasser, estimates that it's closer to 1,500. Quote, a lot of officers don't state their religion on employment documents, he said. They are not obligated to, and they don't think it makes any difference. Okay, now back toward the beginning of this article. Here's how it opens. Listen to this. It says, quote, the number of Arab American and Muslim police officers in New York City has increased dramatically since the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. But trust remains the biggest obstacle in improving relations between the New York Police Department and the city's Muslim population. Our end goal, said Detective Mohammed Amin, an Egyptian by birth who handles clergy affairs in the New York Police Department's Community Outreach Development or Outreach Department. Our end goal is to ensure the community that this is their police department. It is we, not me and them. Ensure what community? Well, presumably the Muslim community. Presumably the Muslim community. All right, so that was 2017 with approximately anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 Muslims in the New York Police Department. Now let's fast forward to 2025. This is an article published just last month, 3/11/25, March 11th, 2025, the Halal Times. The Halal Times, with their headline, quote, New York Police Department embraces Ramadan with historic symbol of inclusion. And of course, they got a big crescent moon there with the New York Police Department. And at one point, in one of these paragraphs, it says, quote, with approximately 3,000 Muslim officers currently serving in the NYPD. The department's acknowledgement of Ramadan carries significant weight. It goes on. 3,000 Muslim officers. There were virtually no Muslim officers in the NYPD back when 9/11 happened. This would be one of the reasons why I have come to believe that the whole purpose of 9/11 and the 9/11 wars was to use this as a springboard to destabilize various Muslim countries, Muslim territories, and then use that as an excuse to bring massive Islamic immigration into the West, into America, and then build up the Muslim population, use the claim that the Muslims are victims because of the misunderstandings of 9/11, and then use that to advance them using civil rights arguments, which is exactly what they've done. Now we've got 3,000 Muslim police officers in the NYPD, the city that was attacked on 9/11. Okay? I believe that they are infiltrating police departments across the country. There's probably a lot more of them in other cities that we don't know that much about. But bringing it all back to this situation in Plano, Texas, why would they build a house right there overlooking the police academy? I believe it's because ultimately they're planning to infiltrate it. And for all we know, they may have already infiltrated it. We'll just have to do follow-up investigation and kind of pay attention to the situation there in Plano, Texas. But it seems highly unlikely, given how Islam operates in various countries, highly unlikely that they're not going to seek places of power. That's just what they do. That's just what they do, because they want the political power and control, because they need that in order to implement Sharia. They can't bring in Sharia law unless they have the power of government to do it with. And there's no question that that is their ambition. That's their aim. That is the direction that they wish to take our country, and they are moving in that direction. All Americans should be aware of this, because under Sharia, under Islamic Sharia, the non-Muslim has virtually no rights whatsoever. The non-Muslim is a second-class citizen. All rights belong to the Muslim. And whatever any Muslim tells you that, no, that's not true, or whatever, they know it's true. They know it's true. So that is where some of these communities are headed. But awareness is the most important thing. I believe that it is not too late for our country, just like I believe it's not too late for England. But let's look very quickly. You know, part of the reason I wanted to cover this story is because of comments made by J.D. Vance. Vice President Vance made comments to the effect that UK, the United Kingdom, may end up being the first Islamist country with nuclear weapons. He said it in kind of an offhand manner, and I think he was only half joking. Listen to this, though. Let's hear this comment from Vice President Vance.
I was talking with a friend recently, and we were talking about, one of the big dangers in the world, of course, is nuclear proliferation, though, of course, the Biden administration doesn't care about it. And I was talking about, what is the first truly Islamist country that will get a nuclear weapon? And we were like, maybe it's Iran, maybe Pakistan already kind of counts. And then we sort of finally decided maybe it's actually the UK, since Labour just took over.
Yeah, the Labour Party, that's what he's talking about with Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer, who is a big time, he's for all intents and purposes a dhimmi. A dhimmi is a non-Muslim who just agrees to submit to the authority of Islam. He's effectively gone down that path as the Prime Minister of England. England is not in a good place at all. And we have to look at what's happening in England as a warning to the United States, the warning to us here as Americans. Now, the big benefit that we have is that we still have the Second Amendment. We still have the right to bear arms. They gave up that right back in 1997 over in the UK. It's unfortunate, but they have many Muslims sitting as mayors and politicians and so on in their country. And they are systematically taking over the politics of England, so that you've got all these. You see, Khan, we all hear about the mayor of London, but there's many other leaders who are mayors over in the UK who are in charge of towns and cities and things like this who are Muslim. In fact, they've gotten to a point now where one UK police department has posted a notice that the only police officers that they're going to hire are non-whites. Non-whites. They will not hire any white police officers. Yeah, this is posted on Remix. Whites need not apply. British police force blocks applications from white people in favor of diversity candidates. Now, you can bet that the vast majority of the police that they're going to hire, as they're saying no to the white guys, they're going to be putting Muslims, Islamists in as the police force. And this is what we talked about back when you had the defund the police movement with Black Lives Matter and Antifa. It wasn't really about defunding the police, but rather replacing them. And I talked about at the time how what they want is some kind of Chinese Red Guard or something like that was the real ambition. Well, they didn't get very far with defunding the police outright. But it looks like now what they're trying to do is to replace the old school police officers in a more indirect manner, but without completely defunding them. And it looks like what they're doing in England right now, getting rid of the white police officers, replacing them with non-whites, the vast majority of whom are almost certainly going to be Muslims. Give them the jobs, and now they're going to be the ones to have the authority to go in and arrest and prosecute and persecute Christians in England. I believe eventually there's going to be a big push for the same thing here in the United States. I think it's already started. We're not as far down the rabbit hole as the English are. Part of our advantage, in addition to the Second Amendment, is the size of our population. The fact that they've only got 62 million people. We've got over 300 million people. It's just going to take a lot longer for the Islamists to infiltrate all these different towns, cities, states, etc. It's going to be much more difficult. But that's where they're headed, folks. They've openly said it, and they've said it for years. It's been well documented. Now, we have to recognize the danger. I would say, from a biblical perspective, we know that persecution is foretold and prophesied for the people of God. We know that. And Muslims are among the chief persecutors of Christians all over the world. I've warned before, why are the globalists bringing in all of these Muslims into Western Europe and America? And I've talked about, I think this is a continuation of World War II. It's because The Nazis believed that there were too many Christians in Western Europe, and they need people who will not be afraid to basically carry out the next Holocaust in the Western world. That's what I believe they're setting up. I believe they are setting up, the globalists collectively are setting up a future Holocaust. All of these groups, whether it's the Vatican, the Jesuits, the Bilderbergs, the European Union, United Nations, the Democrats here in America, probably some of the Republicans, any of those who are globalist in their ideology. We've had warnings about FEMA building these camps and this kind of thing. It looks like the Trump administration is opposing a lot of this stuff. And the fact that, I was going to talk about the situation with Ignatius Loyola. We're not going to have a lot of time because we're running out of time here, but I will just, let me see if I can cut to the chase on this. But the Trump administration is deporting a Hamas-linked Georgetown academic. They're getting ready to deport this guy, a guy named Badar Khan Suri, a fellow at Georgetown University's Prince Al-Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. Now, that Prince Al-Walid, etc. Center is also called the Bridge Initiative, and that is where they teach Islamophobia. The whole thing is about Islamophobia. It's not about Muslim Christian understanding. It's about brainwashing the students to believe that Americans and Christians all have Islamophobia. Nothing wrong with the Muslims. They're perfectly wonderful. They never did anything wrong. The fault is the Christians, and the Americans are all a bunch of Islamophobes. That is the problem. That's basically what they teach there. Don't take my word for it. Look it up online. You'll see. There's no objectivity whatsoever. Okay, well, now the Jesuits are taking things a step further where Islam is concerned. Here's an article that I mentioned this article. This is found on a website called thinkingfaith.org, thinkingfaith.org. And the name of the article is Ignatius of Loyola, Apostle to the Muslims. That's what it says. Now, here's what the article is. And the article is written by a Jesuit priest. Okay? Written by Damian Howard S.J. S.J. meaning the Society of Jesus. So it says this, quote, to educate the youth of Europe, to fight the spread of Protestantism, while many people would guess that one or both of these ambitions drove Ignatius of Loyola to found the Jesuits, he actually had something else in mind, a mission to the Muslim world. For the feast of St. Ignatius, Damian Howard S.J. considers how Islam haunted Ignatius's understanding of his calling and celebrates the fruitful work of the many Jesuits who have tried to realize Ignatius's vision in their engagement with Muslims. Okay? So now they're saying that really, the real purpose wasn't the Counter-Reformation at all, like everybody thought for the last 400 plus years. Really, it was about the Muslims, a mission to the Muslim world. Okay? Now, this is Jesuit sophistry at its best. Nobody anywhere ever thought that Ignatius, not that I've ever read. And I kept waiting for this article to show quotes about how Ignatius Loyola said that he's just got to reach out to the Muslims or something. And I still haven't found that. Maybe I'm missing it. If you find it, send me a link. Shoot me an email. Okay? But here's what I want to draw attention to because we're running out of time here. In our film, American Jesuits, we spend a good bit of time talking about World War II and talking about Vladimir Ledochowski, who was the Black Pope during Adolf Hitler's rise to power and into the early part of World War II. He died before the war came to an end. We talk about all of that. But it's believed by authors like Edmund Paris that what Hitler was doing was really following what was called the Ledochowski plan. It was the Black Pope's plan for Europe that the Nazis were pursuing. Okay? And you watch the film, we give you the quotes, and we show you where we get that information from. But anyway, so this article on the Jesuits and the Muslims, or Ignatius Loyola and the Muslims, goes on and goes on and on. And then, toward the end of the article, it says this, quote, "A moment of great significance in the evolution of the Jesuit mission to Muslims occurs in 1937, when Father General Ledochowski sends a letter to Jesuits around the globe appealing for a new generation of missionaries to be trained with the explicit task of converting the Muslim world." 1937. Okay, that's right before the outbreak of World War II. Remember, Hitler would have thousands of Muslim soldiers in his German army. That's what's contained in the book Islam in Nazi Germany's War by David Modadel. And I've talked about that book before. Very, very important work in terms of being able to understand what is going on with this mass importation of Muslims into the West since the end of World War II. Okay? So 1937, you have the Black Pope calling for the task of converting the Muslim world. Now, you have to understand something. For a Jesuit to convert somebody does not mean that they're trying to get him to become a Christian. Doesn't even mean they're trying to get him to become Catholic. It really means that they're trying to get them to submit to papal authority and the papal agenda. That's what it really means. Okay? The explicit task of converting the Muslim world. Quote, "Ledochowski was a strong personality of markedly right-wing views, and his letter is far from betokening an enlightened vision. During his time as general," by the way, I reject utterly the idea that he had right-wing views. Okay? He was in, they keep trying to argue that Hitler and the Nazis were a right-wing movement, and yet the Nazis believed virtually everything that the Democratic Party and the globalists believe today. If you remember that, you won't get confused whenever you hear them making those kind of claims. But anyway, so I don't think Ledochowski had right-wing views. Not at all. But he had a very traditional Catholic inquisitional view, a Catholic view of the Inquisition, that you pursue the heretics and you kill them, and etc. That's really what World War II was about. That's why they call it the Holocaust. The word Holocaust is the Jesuit and Pope's word for the sacrifice of killing heretics. When the popes would write letters, they would say words to the effect, they would write to a king and say, well, go and make a holocaust of these heretics, a holocaust unto the Lord, like a burnt offering. And there's a whole series of quotes that I'm going to have to include in another documentary. I did a radio show and went over them. But for example, if you go to Numbers chapter 15 and verse 3, where in the King James translation it says, and will make an offering by fire unto the Lord, a burnt offering or a sacrifice in performing a vow, etc. Okay? And virtually all of the English translations say an offering by fire, food offering, fire offering, etc., right? Goes on down one of all these different English translations saying something to the effect of an offering by fire. Then you scroll down on like the BibleHub.com website down to the Catholic translations and you have the Douay-Rheims. Now, this was the Jesuits' English translation of the Bible that they did to counter the English Bibles, the Tyndale and the Geneva in particular. Okay, so you read all these English Bibles and it says burnt offering, burnt offering. You get down to the Douay-Rheims Bible and it says, and shall make an offering to the Lord for a holocaust or a victim, paying your vows or voluntarily offering gifts, etc. Okay, then you have the Catholic public domain version. You make an offering to the Lord as a holocaust or as a victim, paying your vows, etc. Now, the first English translation from the Jesuits, and really from the Catholics, because vernacular translations were banned by the Pope. So this is why when Wycliffe did his translation from Latin into Middle English, it was illegal. All right? So this is the first time that you're getting a Bible in English from Rome through the Jesuit order. And what do they choose for burnt offering? A holocaust. That's what they call it. And if you study the letters from the popes over and over again, they talk about making a holocaust, go kill the heretics as a holocaust unto the Lord. All right? So what they are doing with the Muslims, I believe, is they're bringing the Muslims in as kill squads to go against all of the Protestant heretics, the apostate Catholics, which are Catholics who will not go along with the Jesuits' left-wing globalist programs, Magna Carta Catholics, as I call them, who actually believe that rights come from God based on God's law. Yes, they have theological views that we don't agree with, but nevertheless, they generally agree with the morality of the Bible. And that is, and the traditional view that Christianity is the only true religion. It's so important to understand that the Jesuits and the people running the Vatican absolutely despise that doctrine. They want to destroy it. The exclusivity of Christianity as the only true religion. And it is something, I could prove it if we had, I could sit here for the next 2 hours and I could play you one audio clip after another, read you one quote after another, and prove to you that, yes, that is what they want to destroy. Ecumenism is what they want for the one world religion, and they utterly despise the idea, the unique claims of Christianity that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no man comes unto the Father but by him. That neither is there salvation in any other, for there is none other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. Praise the Lord. And so that, brothers and sisters, that's where we've got to take a stand. We've got to take a stand on the gospel of our Lord, because that's where the battleground really is. The powers of hell are working to annihilate the free preaching of the gospel. We've got to remember our ancestors, how they labored, how they suffered, how they fought and died, and quite often, with God's help, prevailed against their enemies. But it was all on behalf of the gospel of Christ and the word of God. Praise the Lord. All right, brothers and sisters, that's going to do it for us today. That is our show. We will stop it there, but we will be back next time as the Lord leads us. Until then, God bless you guys. I'm Chris Pinto, and you've been listening to Noise of Thunder Radio.